there's a breaking update on the Abrego Garcia case, that 9-0 Supreme Court decision that said Trump needed to bring this man home. Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland had gone to El Salvador to try and see Abrego Garcia, and Bukele's goons wouldn't let him see him. So this thing's been a developing 2-day story, but we can confirm from the senator himself that he did meet with Abrego Garcia. He's not dead, very much alive, and it looks like this fight to make sure he gets due process and to upend Trump's attempt to flip the Constitution, it looks like it's working. We're not going to let Trump flip the script on 250 years of our history. No wannabe dictators! Oh, Trumpy, not this time! We're gonna send his ass to CECOT. He keeps it up. My mom used to say, getting too big for your britches, Trumpy! Oh, come on. 9-iron anyone? Oh. You enjoy the video, drop a like, hit that sub button, and turn those noties on, baby! Let's get it. We're gonna scope out the Van Hollen situation. This is super alarming. Obviously, the Abrego Garcia situation is the flashpoint here in the Trump administration, but also in the cornerstone of our democracy, because we have this thing called due process. It is not available just to citizens. The Fifth Amendment says no person can be denied this. Okay, it's not about citizenship. It's about a person whose feet are on American soil. These are guaranteed rights to due process before you're deported, before you're put in jail, before you're punished for a crime, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the fact of the matter is Tom Homan, Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, they have basically created an environment where they consider people to be null and void of the Fifth Amendment. If you are a legal immigrant here, doesn't matter. It doesn't count. If you're undocumented, it certainly doesn't count. They don't even believe it for naturalized citizens. They disagree with the birthright citizenship, which is also a constitutional amendment. And so they have been executing an administration and behavior that just disregards most of the constitutional rights of these people that they're seeking to deport and deporting. And now with the addition of this El Salvador jail, which is like a way that they can just sort of whisk people off and then maybe never be confronted with what they've done because the people have disappeared. So we don't know. But what we do know is everybody focusing on this and not letting go of this is really important. All right, but here we go.
Now, the courts of the United States have said there's no evidence to support the charge that he's part of MS-13. So I asked the vice president whether or not El Salvador has any evidence that he's part of MS-13 or has committed a crime. So I asked the vice president if Abrego Garcia has not committed a crime and the U.S. courts have found that he was illegally taken for the United States, and the government of El Salvador has no evidence that he was part of MS-13. Why is El Salvador continuing to hold him in CECOT? And his answer was that the Trump administration is paying El Salvador, the government of El Salvador, to keep him at CECOT. And I pointed out that neither the government of El Salvador nor the Trump administration has presented evidence to support the claim that he's committed any kind of criminal acts. And so why not release Abrego Garcia today? And he said what President Bukele said the other day at the White House, which that El Salvador can't smuggle Mr. Abrego Garcia into the United States. And I said, I'm not asking him to smuggle Mr. Abrego Garcia into the United States. I'm simply asking him to open the door of CECOT and let this innocent man walk out. And I pointed out that the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, has said that the United States would send a plane to El Salvador to pick him up. And why did she do that? Because the Supreme Court of the United States, in a ruling of 9-0, has said that the Trump administration has to facilitate his return to the United States. Now, there's no evidence that the Trump administration is complying with that order. There's no evidence that they're complying with that order. In fact, the United States Embassy here has told me they've received no direction from the Trump administration to help facilitate his release. So the Trump administration is clearly in violation of American court orders. But that still leaves the question, why is the government of El Salvador continuing to imprison a man where they have no evidence he's committed any crime and they've not been provided any evidence from the United States that he's committed a crime?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. First off, the first thing we have there is the fact that both sides are playing a little bit of it's the other guy. We saw this in the press conference the other day where Trump said, I can't bring him back. It's up to Bukele. Bukele said, I'm not going to smuggle a terrorist into your country, whatever the hell that means. Pam Bondi said that thing of like, if El Salvador decides to release him, we will send a plane, which was meant to, acquiesce to the Supreme Court's 9-0 decision that they were all lying about in that press conference. But the real kicker here is him finding out that El Salvador will not release this guy because Trump is paying them to keep him. They're all fucking scoundrels. And I mean, it's insane. A number of things are insane. It's insane that people are being deported without due process. It is, I will never be able to wrap my head around this, why there's not nationwide protests, because the idea that the other 260 guys that were on that plane were not from El Salvador. They were from Venezuela. So we took people that are Venezuelan citizens that had committed no crime in the United States. 75% of them had no criminal record, okay? They were not charged with the crime. They packed them up. They put them on the plane, these Venezuelans. They flew them to El Salvador and put them in a terrorist confinement center for life. There's no way for them to get out. El Salvador, I don't believe they ever let people out of this jail. It holds like 40,000 people. That's insane. That is, like it says right here, that is 100% human trafficking, taking people from Venezuela and selling them to a prison in El Salvador. It's enslavement. It's human trafficking. This is fucking crazy. And people in the Trump administration need to go to jail for this. See, the thing that's really crazy about it, the perfect storm of this, guys, harkens back to what I said in the beginning. That when you look at Donald Trump, when you look at Tom Homan, when you look at Stephen Miller, even when you look at Marco Rubio, especially when you look at Pam Bondi, you take these basic, like the state and the Justice Department and the ICE people, and they don't believe that all people on U.S. soil deserve those constitutional rights. They want to defy the Constitution that says no person shall be subjected to treatment that doesn't protect their rights. They want it to be citizen. So in their eye, they can send legal immigrants to El Salvador, to a jail. They can send naturalized U.S. citizens to an El Salvador jail. They could dissidents or whomever to this El Salvador jail. Now, picture this. Even if you look at somebody who comes to America undocumented, if you look at them as though they've committed a crime, okay, let's just say I look at that as like a paper violation. To me, it's not a criminal offense. It's like a parking ticket or like getting a ticket for not having your car registered. It's not a criminal offense. It's paperwork, okay? There are some people who look at people who come and cross the border undocumented as a criminal offense. I just want to, for the sake of this argument, assume that even if you believe crossing the border and being here undocumented is a criminal offense, let's just say it is. Even though I disagree with that, for the sake of argument, let's say that crossing the border and being undocumented is in fact committing a crime. Even if that's true, the punishment for that crime, it most certainly is not life imprisonment in an El Salvadorian jail. Flying them to a random country and putting them in a terrorist center for the crime of crossing the border, that is unacceptable. There's no fucking way. That is a human rights violation. We shouldn't be surprised, but I'll tell you what the cold, hard reality is. It's now, we're more aware than ever. They have separate belief systems. The MAGA and the Republicans have separate belief systems. Okay? They get due process. They get every sort of benefit of the doubt and every grace afforded to them. But anybody that they consider an enemy is not allowed due process. I mean, more than ever, we realize that MAGA doesn't look at the U.S. population as like fellow citizens of equal value. They literally look at like the rules for MAGA, and MAGA's in charge, and then everybody else isn't owed any type of constitutional right whatsoever. Right? I mean, it's pretty obvious now that, you know, they can't really hide anymore and act like they are, you know, for all Americans, because they're not. They're not. There's MAGA, and then there's everybody else. If everybody else ended up in an El Salvadorian jail, I don't think MAGA would care. All right, let's see what he says here.
With the vice president of El Salvador. I've had back-to-back meetings here in El Salvador with our team from the American Embassy, with the vice president of El Salvador, with human rights groups. And the entire purpose has been to bring Abrego Garcia home.
All right, now I just want to point out here, okay, that what Van Hollen's doing and how important this is, okay? Because think about this, guys. Here's the most important thing that Van Hollen is doing here. Whether they get Abrego Garcia, whether they get him back, I know they're going to fight and be relentless, but this is becoming an international news story. You can bet that human rights groups from every free country in the world, they're getting in on this now. He is elevating this beyond like a U.S. news cycle to a ginormous worldwide human rights type story that like the lens is on. The light is being shown now. Okay, he's taking these meetings. This is like elevating the alarm. And I think this is really, really important. We need, I hope others join him. And then I hope this becomes a relentless thing. This should be something that is relentless throughout the Trump admin. We need, the whole world can rally behind this. Human trafficking is human fucking trafficking, bro.
Because U.S. courts have determined that he was illegally abducted from the United States and now finds himself in the most notorious prison in El Salvador. The Supreme Court, 9-0, has told the Trump administration they must facilitate his return home. They've refused to do it. So I called upon the government of El Salvador to do it unless they can provide evidence that he's been involved in MS-13. They said they had no evidence. So,
see, that's a problem there. They're getting paid to hold this guy because of MS-13. No one has seen the evidence of him being in MS-13 except like one fucking police report or some shit of him wearing a Chicago Bulls hat with like some imagery on it in the parking lot of a Home Depot, and supposedly an anonymous informant that the government has never produced.
This is not about MS-13. I know President Trump wants to make this about gang violence. I have been fighting MS-13 probably longer than Donald Trump even knew. about MS-13.
Touche. Oh, and that really puts it in perspective. Like, yeah, Donald Trump, he thought MS-13 was like his password for his like extra condom stash, right? In the back of his fucking closet, right? The password for his little lockbox, dude. Dude, he didn't even know what that meant until he campaigned for president.
I care about every victim of crime. That's why we have a court system, to hold people accountable when they commit crimes, to make sure that they get the punishment they deserve. We also have a court system to make sure that people who have not committed crimes or not been convicted of crimes are not disappeared out of the United States and sent to a notorious prison in El Salvador, like Abrego Garcia. This is simply about letting him have his day in court. We use the courts to make sure that we don't convict people who are not guilty and that we convict those who are.
Now, there's a lot of shit running amok because, of course, the right-wing influencers are trying to spin this. Democrats are trying to save this gangster. Democrats are only concerned about letting terrorists into the country, all this nonsense. This is a situation of due process. This is a situation of due process for a person who is in the United States. Okay, a person who actually had paperwork that allowed them to legally remain in the United States. But in the end, it doesn't even matter. Doesn't even matter if he's completely undocumented. Every person who steps foot in the United States is allowed due process. If you want to deport them, you can. You go in front of a judge, you show your information, the judge makes a ruling, and then you can deport. Now, there's one thing we should point out, and this was from yesterday. Okay, that TikTok of Charlie Kirk getting his ass handed to him. I made a video about it. There was a very telling point in that debate calling Charlie Kirk out and saying this guy is allowed his day in court for due process. And Charlie Kirk kind of gave it away, right, as he does when he runs his mouth. He said, do you realize how long it would take to deport people if we did that? So the basic premise here is they want to deport a lot of people. They want to do it very fast. And they don't believe that they should have to give due process because of the amount of time it will take. Now, I mean, there's a solution. If you feel like the process is too slow, fine. Pass a border legislation bill that ramps up the number of judges and the number of attorneys. Put some money in there so you can do 1,000 of these cases a day, and let's have at it if you want to make it move fast. But you don't get to deny constitutional rights simply because you are in a hurry to do something. You know, that's not how it works. And they think it should be, but it can't be. Okay? People have a right to due process. This entire argument is about due process. What is up, guys? Thank you so much for watching. If you like the video, you want to support independent resistance media, you know what to do. Drop that sub, hit the like button, and please share it. And we do love our members, so if you want to become a member, it's another really great way to support. Thanks again for everything, guys. I'll see you next time. Let's go.